I'm gonna hit the one. I did a little practicing.
Pam?
Yep. Ready?
Pam?
Okay. You will have to.
No?
Hello. And
Hello.
welcome. And welcome to the Church of Scientology of Ventura. I'm very pleased that you're here tonight, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here. It is a subject that I think is fascinating tonight, and I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight, and that is Mr. Tim Helton. Welcome.
Thank you, Bobby. Terry is not here, as I've told, I think, most of you. She is having knee trouble, and she's actually getting an MRI this evening. But she gave me a long list of things to say to you, so I'm going to do that first. So first of all, welcome on behalf of the Ventura County Interfaith Community, and thank you to our host, the Church of Scientology of Ventura and Bobby. We appreciate so much you making the space available to us. Restrooms are outside if you need them, right out there. And we want to you to be aware that we are recording this. If that makes you nervous, don't say anything. And don't come up here. So we just want you to be aware that we're recording. We want to let you know that there are a couple of a forum and a venue visit in the offing. So what I mean by that, we believe there will be a forum on Sikhism. That's the world's 6th largest religion, as it turns out, and that we believe will be on May 21st, but we're not sure yet. So pay attention to vcic.info. That's our website, and as soon as we have firmed up the date, we'll put it on there. And then another thing that we're going to do is, by popular request, we're going to begin visiting some of the venues of the congregations that participate in Ventura County Interfaith Community. And our first venue visit will be to Temple Ora Me in Calabasas. It'll be May 10th, and we're looking forward to being there around 6 o'clock, 6:15, having a tour, a little explanation, and then participating in a service with Temple Ora Me. And there are flyers back on the table. If that's at all of interest to you, feel free to take a flyer. So those are the two upcoming events that we anticipate. At the end of the session, we'll have a question and answer period. So hold your questions and answers. But I want to just introduce the topic a little bit real quickly. There's a famous quote from the New Testament, one of the letters to 1 Timothy, and it says that the root of the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's one of the most common things that you hear about money. Money has had a fraught relationship with faith for at least 3 millennia. And in the Quran, you have a wonderful verse that says, among the attributes of the believing servants of Allah are those who, when they spend, are neither extravagant nor stingy, but are in a just balance between them. Similarly, the Hebrew Bible talks about finances, and it says, in Malachi, it has some frightening words. It says, will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you do rob me. But you ask, how are you robbing me? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. I will prevent the pest from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it is ripe, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. One of the most important scriptures, and one of the most meaningful scriptures to me, however, comes from the words of Jesus, when he says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be." So we have these wonderful scriptures that talk about faith and finance. We have and yet probably it's one of the most abused, greatest abuses of religious communities is the maltreatment of finances. And so we want to see how some of the communities that we deal with, some of the faith communities that we interact with, how they navigate this tension between faith and finance. So we're looking forward to a presentation by Rabbi Michael Locker. And Mike, if you join us on behind the table, and Adam Basua, if you join us up here also. We do have a third presenter, and if he comes, we'll bring him up as well. But we always take the oldest religions first, and so Judaism has the honor of being the oldest religion tonight. And so I want to introduce, first of all, Rabbi Michael Locker. Rabbi Michael Locker is the second career rabbi, having been ordained at the age of 55 from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2003. He is a physicist who spent his first career in alternative energy, focusing on wind, solar, and geothermal energy. He is presently Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Nerami in Camarillo, California, the community rabbi for the Jewish Federation of Ventura County, and the scholar in residence for Temple Adat Elohim in Thousand Oaks. He is a member of the the Conference of American Rabbis and the Board of Rabbis of Southern California. His interest and participation in interfaith dialogue stimulated his rabbinic thesis entitled Ezer Negdo Toward a Theology of Jewish-Christian Partnership. He is a sought-after speaker at synagogues, churches, and campuses. In June 2014, he offered the opening prayer at the United States House of Representatives. What this bio doesn't say is that he's a great friend of Ventura County Interfaith, and we're pleased to have you. And if you'd like to step up here for your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to talk about faith and finance and money in Judaism, and it sort of takes a middle road. There's a saying in rabbinic Judaism which is "Ein Kemach, Ein Torah," which literally means without wheat, without food, there is no Torah. There's no worship. There, basically, the fundamental problem that we all who are in the religion biz face is there are real costs. And some of them are significant. You wouldn't believe what it costs to fix an elevator. Something like $23,000. So the fundamental issue is how do we balance that with the spiritual nature of worship? So what I'd like to do is pretty quickly kind of go through Judaism, and I think I gave a talk a few months ago called Biblical Judaism and Extinct Religion. The Judaism that we practice is not the Judaism of the Hebrew Bible. The Judaism of the Hebrew Bible is a religion based on sacrificial system and worship and temple, but it does have something to say about financing, and it basically talks about tithing, which I think we'll hear a lot about from the different faith traditions. The word tithing, I think in English, comes from the word for tenth. In the Hebrew, it's ma'aser, which comes from the Hebrew word eser, which means a tenth. And so basically, you're obligated to give a tenth of your assets and then a tenth of what you earn to the temple system to support the temple system and the priests and the Levites and the structure. And of course, once the temple is destroyed, roughly in the year 70 to be precise, Then we have what is called rabbinic Judaism, and the rabbis will have a lot to say about financing as well. There's also a form of dues, which is half a shekel. And those of you who know something about the Israeli shekel will say, gee, that doesn't sound like very much, because the exchange rate for an Israeli shekel is about 20 cents. So half a shekel is 10 cents. But in the Bible, it says that's the dues. It's equivalent to roughly $20. A shekel is a unit of weight. So a shekel of silver, a half shekel of silver would be about $20. As Judaism transitions from a religion based on animal sacrifice and a temple and a priesthood to one that is portable, because once the temple's destroyed by the Romans, the Jews are essentially expelled from much of the Holy Land. And so Judaism becomes a portable religion, and instead of priests offering sacrifice, we have synagogues and rabbis offering prayers. And a key element in that system is called tzedakah. And I have here a tzedakah box. I'll bring it over. So it is traditional in a Jewish home to have one of these on the table. And before you eat, the kids are trained at a very early age. You put some coins. The Yiddish term for this is a pushke. You put some coins in the tzedakah box. The word tzedakah, and we'll hear from our Muslim friends, there's a zadaka, correct?
Sadaka.
I'm sorry?
Sadaka.
Yeah, so it's very similar. Arabic and Hebrew are very similar, representing funds that are supplied. But the word tzedakah comes from the Hebrew word tzedek, which means justice. So if you're not giving tzedakah, you're not being stingy, you're being unjust. And the theory is that the assets that you have, financial and otherwise, are from God, and God has given you those assets in part so that you are to give to others. Although Judaism never embraced the idea of asceticism, of impoverishing yourself. So there is this goal of 10%, and if exceptionally high of 20%, but there never developed a serious movement within Judaism to impoverish yourself. In fact, one of my favorite thoughts is that there's a concept of questions that you're asked in heaven when you meet your maker. Well, that would be an interesting topic for the different religions. So in Judaism, there's a discussion of 7 questions. And my favorite one is that God will ask us to account for all the legitimate pleasures in life that we have denied ourselves. Sorry, the word legitimate is still in there. But the idea, which I really love, is that God has given us what amounts to a smorgasbord of delights and intends for us to participate. So there never has developed a serious tradition of impoverishment within Judaism, but you are obligated to share what you have. The other thing is, as Jews were scattered across the world, it was always understood that we were a separate nation. There's something called Am Yisrael, the people Israel. So we were always a separate nation living among other nations. And we were treated, in medieval times, as a separate nation. We taxed ourselves, and then the governing body taxed the Jewish community. But it was self-governing. And then roughly in the 18th century, in the United States, the Protestant model of participation and really selling seats in the church or synagogue was developed. So in terms of what goes on today, once again, the idea is Jews are a people, and every Jew has a responsibility, first to yourself, your family, to your community, to other Jews, and then to everyone. But we understand that we are a nation. So there are lots of Jewish organizations that enact these responsibilities. The one I work for, which is the Jewish Federation. So I work for the Ventura County version of this, and basically it's an umbrella organization for all the Jewish communities in Ventura County. And I'm the community rabbi for that organization. Then there's something called the Jewish National Fund, which was started in 1901. And there was a little green box, or a little green and blue box that everyone had on their table, and you put coins in, and you would send the money to JNF. And the major activity of JNF that we were all familiar with was planting trees in Israel. And typically, you know, when a good thing happened, someone was bar mitzvah or a wedding or something, you would buy a tree and you'd get a certificate, and the rabbi would usually joke, you know, your day for watering it is every second Thursday. But areas that were, you know, in Roman times, to build these great buildings that Herod built, basically trees were cut down to make concrete. You know, to I guess to roast lime. I really don't know much about how that works, but a large fraction of the Holy Land was denuded of trees, and roughly around 1900, JNF started a specific program to replant the land. And JNF does a lot of other things, research and education and so on. There's something called the Joint Distribution Committee, which was started in 1914, supporting starving Jews in Ottoman-era Palestine communities, and to rebuild the shattered Europe after the Holocaust, strengthening Jewish communities from Casablanca to Mumbai and beyond. And one of the things that's very personal for me, I think many of you know the story of my wife Sonia, who was born in Casablanca in Morocco and moved to New York when she was 15 years old because it was unsafe for young Jewish women to be on the streets of Morocco after the Six-Day War, after Israel defeated the nations that attacked it in 1967. There was a lot of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel feeling even in Morocco, where the Jews really are very well welcomed. So many Jews left Morocco at that time, including my wife, and she went to New York with her brother, not speaking a word of English, and basically the Joint Distribution Community matched them up with a Jewish family in Long Island, and she lived there for several years and made her way. There is something called the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, again about 100 years, started more than 100 years ago, helping communities in different places, and especially communities impoverished in the Holocaust. So I want to move quickly to the idea to how synagogues are funded. There's a lot of different systems, but one of the things you will never see in a synagogue, particularly on Shabbat, or really any other time, is passing the plate. Partially because on Shabbat you don't handle money. And I can answer questions about why that's the case. So when most Jews are in synagogue and on Shabbat, they would never think of handling money. Typically there will be a tzedakah box in the back of the sanctuary or in the lobby, so people entering the synagogue before Shabbat begins on Friday night can make donations. Most synagogues have a dues structure. And one Jewish historian, Jonathan Sarlin, argued that dues are the price that Jews pay for separation of church and state. In this country, synagogues are not supported by the state. It's not true everywhere. In Israel, Orthodox synagogues are in fact supported by the state. There are lots of, so typically there is a system that most synagogues have. And they will start often by saying the suggested donation is a fair share, or somewhere around 1.5% to 2% of your adjusted gross income on your 1040. Remember 1040s and taxes? It seems like ages ago, right? Only 2 days. And then there will be often a actual structure which says, young married families, this much. Single people, that much. People with children, a higher amount. Tuition for schools are included. Now, in light of recent events, over the last few years, there are now typically in congregations security add-ons of, I think in one synagogue that I'm very familiar with, $500 to $700 a year to pay for the added security of armed guards that are now at synagogues. And importantly, most synagogues, I would say every synagogue, has a system where if you can't afford to pay, they will work with you. Other synagogue systems will have a purely voluntary basis. here's our real needs, here's our budget, here's like an annual average contribution that many congregants pay. Just tell us what you can afford and we will accept it. So that's a possibility. Synagogues will often, some that I've been connected with, some I've been connected with don't do this, will charge for high holiday seats. In Judaism, our equivalent of Easter and Christmas is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Jewish New Year and Day of Atonement, when most Jews who never show up any other time will come to synagogue. And so there will be tickets sold for that. If you're a member, you don't pay more, but if you're like many people and you're not a member of a congregation, you can buy tickets. It's the old joke about a guy shows up at one of these things and he says, he's stopped by the guard because he doesn't have a ticket. And he says, no, I just have to, tell, my brother that there's an emergency at home. And the guard lets him through. He says, okay, you can go in for a few minutes, but remember, no praying. Let's see. And there's often fundraising, you name it. There's various innovative and interesting ways to raise money. There are, I call this plaques. If you go into a synagogue, you will see a name plaque on everything that has room to put a name plaque on. And this has an idea, again, tzedakah, of making a gift typically in honor of someone or in memory of someone. And the idea here theologically is if you make a gift like this, you get the credit. There's a Hebrew word called mitzvah, which you've probably heard of. The Hebrew word mitzvah doesn't mean good deed. Most people think it means good deed. It actually means commandment. So by following the commandments, you get credit in the afterlife or wherever. But if you donate money in honor of someone or in memory of someone, you get the credit and that person gets the credit. So it's like a double benefit. And you'll see trees of honor with leaves that are purchased, items in the synagogue on the ark or on various pieces of art. There are lots of scams associated with religion, and certainly with Judaism. And in Jewish mysticism, there's something called Kabbalah, and I have seen people selling Kabbalah water or red strings to tie around your hand, and supposedly these have been blessed, or they've been circled around the grave of Rachel in Bethlehem. And it's really a scam system, and there's folks in the world of Kabbalah that will sell you books and want you to keep buying more and more and more. And again, I can talk about that. People are seeking handouts. I often tell the story. In the synagogue where I was a rabbi, was in Camarillo, and we shared a building with the Church of Christ. And we had one guy who would answer the phone for both entities. So if the number for the synagogue was called, he would say Shalom, Temple Narami. And if it was a church, he would say hello, Camarillo Church of Christ. So one day he gets a call. The guy is in trouble, destitute, just needs some bus fare to get from Camarillo to Ojai or something. And I go to visit him, and it wasn't a lot of money that he was seeking, $20 or $30. I met him, gave him the cash, and we were on our way. When I come back in to the synagogue, having met this guy, the fellow that answers the phone is laughing. And I said, what's so funny? He said, the guy just called and said, not that he was a Jew stranded, that he was a member of the Church of Christ, and he was stranded, and the same guy was calling, but just called the other number. A lot of times, this leads, as you can imagine, to some stress, because people are embarrassed if they can't afford to pay the dues. And quite often, it's the person that answers the phone at the synagogue who will say, sorry, this is the dues, and you have to pay. Yeah, we can work something out, but everybody pays. And the person will be discouraged and go away, or they will be greeted carefully and considerately. I've met people in congregations who was detached from Judaism for 3 and 4 generations for the way one person was treated, so therefore their children never were connected with the synagogue, and their grandchildren were never connected with the synagogue. And now in the 4th generation, they were perhaps getting reconnected. I had one lady once call me up and called, my synagogue, temple, Narami and Camarillo, and said she was treated very abruptly and very unkindly, and told that basically, no money, no membership, no praying. And my reaction is, I will fix this, because neither you nor I want to be associated with a synagogue that treats people that way. So it is a challenge. Some synagogues will have an entirely voluntary system, and then with the thought that people can pay when they get in better financial situations. The bottom line is that there's a dance between the need to pay the bills and the need to recognize that we're in a business that is really not just about shekels and dollars and coins, but about connecting with the Holy One of blessings. And so it is sometimes difficult and hard to do this well. So I'll turn it over to Adam and look forward. Well, I guess he will be introduced.
I need to introduce Adam.
Okay, good.
And so President Adam Basua, a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, currently serves as the second counselor in the state presidency of the Camarillo State. His journey within the church includes fulfilling roles such as bishop counselor to bishop, high counselor, young men's president, and early morning seminary teacher. That one got my attention. When I was a kid, I remember going to an LDS early morning, and I was really impressed with kids that would get up that early. Anyway, professionally he excels as an ambulatory medicine manager at Community Memorial Healthcare in Ventura, leveraging his degree in technology. He is married to the former Melissa Beck, and they live in Oxnard and are the parent of 8 children. Beyond his religious and professional commitments, President Basua enjoys being a grill master, indulging in Star Trek and Star Wars, collecting and selling sports cards, and sharing his infectious humors through dad jokes, reflecting his unwavering dedication to faith, family, and community. Welcome, Adam.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate that, and I really enjoyed the presentation we just heard. I'm very fascinated with the Jewish religion, and I really have a lot of respect and admiration. Were we gonna open this guy?
Sure.
I thought we were gonna. Yeah, I was told I'm a technology guy, as you saw, so I'm trying to. There we go. See, technology. Yeah. Okay. All right, so you can go to the very first slide if you'd like. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a background before I get into the actual details and logistics of how we deal with this topic. So the Savior Jesus Christ taught that very verse there in Matthew, love thy neighbor as thyself. And so as members of the church, we sacrifice and we serve others as the Savior did, both the givers and the receivers. We're all blessed with compassion, empathy, and love that lead to what we consider exaltation and eternal life, which is our goal, which is the purpose of why we're here. So members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints consider caring for the poor and the needy as a fundamental gospel doctrine. It's an essential element in the Lord's plan of salvation for us, for his children. And the scriptures are replete with this command to serve others. Next slide, you can actually see one here in the Old Testament. For the poor, in Deuteronomy, for the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore, I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy in thy land. Go ahead, next slide. And so, 2 ways that members of the church care for the poor and the needy in our church is through tithes and offerings. So let's first discuss tithing. So go ahead, next slide. And then, go ahead, next slide. So we learned a little bit about that in our last presentation. Very similar, we believe in tithing. It's natural, it's integrated in many other religious practices and really other beliefs. And the biblical definition is tithing is 1/10, right? So like we heard. And church members interpret this as 1/10 of our increase or our income, right? So, and this is annually. And how you pay that is, there's no rule of how often you pay it. You can pay it as you get paid. You can pay it once a year. There's no rule. That's up to you how you'd like to pay it. Most people that I can see, because I served as bishop, and I'll talk about what a bishop does with the funds that come in. Most people like to pay when they get paid. It's just kind of a nice organized thing, but it's totally up to the person. It's paid on the honor system, right? No one asks to see any income statements or pay slips. That's not how it works. It's all honor system. So go ahead, next slide. So what do we do with these tithings? Well, what's the actual process? Go ahead and you can see here the member is first, decides to pay tithing, and then the next little graphic, they give it, pass it along to the bishop or other ward leaders. A bishop is a leader of a ward or a congregation, but sometimes we have branches and groups, and so they don't have bishops, they have presidents and they have group leaders. But anyway, it is a ward leader, and then of course that money goes into the church headquarters. So tithes and other charitable donations help the church basically carry out its mission of spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, caring for the poor, strengthening members' faith and commitment to Jesus Christ. They're always used for the Lord's purposes, to build and maintain temples, to sustain missionary work, to educate church members, to carry on the work of the Lord throughout the world. So again, tithing donations are usually remitted through the local congregational leader or bishop, and from there to church headquarters, where they are allocated and dispersed directly to the church's many worldwide programs, including its educational, missionary, buildings, humanitarian, and welfare efforts. So, of course, those in charge of this are acting according to Revelation. They make decisions as to where that money should be going, directed from the Lord. Okay? Additionally, tithing funds the construction and maintenance of church facilities, right? Much like we heard about the synagogues. These buildings provide the infrastructure for delivering both physical, spiritual relief to the community members. In addition to helping the church care for the less fortunate, the well-being of the less fortunate. And Latter-day Saints make charitable donations on top of tithing because they believe in fulfilling we believe in fulfilling God's commandment to tithe and to give to the poor. Next slide. So again, we talked about where these tithings go, right? So church members give their tithing directly to local leaders. These local leaders transmit tithing funds directly to the headquarters of the church, where a council determines specific ways to use them. And that council is comprised of our first presidency, which is the president of our church and his 2 counselors, and the quorum of the 12 apostles, which are also 12 men who are part of that council to decide. And then, of course, what's called our presiding bishopric, a bishop and 2 counselors that are over the entire church. They decide where the funds will be going. So all funds that the church, given to the church by its members, are considered sacred. That's how we look at them. They are voluntary offerings. They represent the faith and the dedication of members and are used with careful oversight and discretion. They are audited regularly by independent certified auditors. Usually, a lot of times, not even members of our church, just professional organizations that audit us. And here you can see an example of what I used to do as a bishop's counselor every Sunday, when we take some of the envelopes that we get and count the money, put it in the bag, and then go deposit it. Yeah. Now it's not as much as this because a lot of people like to pay online, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So, next slide. So tithing has long been recognized, and Tim, you stole my thunder with stealing the Malachi verses, but I'm going to show it here anyway, based off of scriptural teaching. So the Bible indicates that God's people follow the law of tithing anciently. In fact, according to Genesis, Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. And the prophet Malachi, as you can see here, and I'm just going to skip it because Tim, let's read it. Because he stole my thunder, but we're going to read it anyway. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if it will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. I can testify that is so true. That there is not enough room to receive the blessings that come to you when you give to the Lord. Okay, you go ahead and go next. So this, I'm not going to read through this, but this was some of the humanitarian efforts in the year 2022 that were done by our church. You can there's a link there that you can go and see, but I'll just read the first bullet. In the church's 2022 annual report on caring for those in need, it showed that this work included more than $1 billion in expenditures, 6.3 million hours volunteered, and 3,692 humanitarian projects in 190 countries and its territories. And below the bullet points, you can see some of the ones that we did. One of my favorite ones is helping feed those in Africa, children in Africa who need food. And I love that our church uses our tithing to not just bless members of our church in our area, but throughout the entire world. It's really a wonderful thing. Okay, so next. All right, next slide. This is a quote from this, and in fact, this is a picture of our first presidency. Down at the bottom is Russell M. Nelson. He is our prophet, president of the church, and his two counselors, President Oakes and President Eyring. And this is just a quote that they had given, and I wanted to share it. As his followers, we seek to love God and our neighbors throughout the world. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is eager to bless others and to help those in need. We are blessed to have the ability, resources, and trusted global connections to carry out this sacred responsibility, which we consider a joyful privilege. I honestly can echo that. We love to help our neighbors, especially the poor. No matter where you are, no matter what you believe, we just want to help. Next slide. Okay, how do we do this? How do we pay tithing? Go ahead and next slide. So there are two ways, a nice little graphic there. You can pay in person or online. And yes, we do teach our children from the time they're young to pay tithing. My children, I have 8 children, and I taught my children when they received their allowance or whenever they did babysitting to pay 10% of their what they earned to tithing. And it's a nice way of teaching your children that principle from the time they're young. And then, of course, you can pay online. Next slide. So I took a picture of a current situation in one of our buildings. So that one in the upper left corner, these are envelopes that you can, when you walk into an LDS, a church house, a meeting house, you can find these envelopes there right on the wall, and you can write out a slip and put cash or a check in there and hand that to the bishop or one of his counselors. And there's an example of that. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, paying online. That right there is the graphic that you use to pay online. That's exactly what the tithing slip looks like. You can see there's a spot for the tithing. I'll talk about what fast offerings are for. And then there's also other areas where the charitable contributions can be. General missionary, ward missionary, humanitarian aid, and general offerings. I have 2 children that are currently serving missions right now. One of them is in Texas, Austin, Texas. The other one is in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. And so members of our congregation love to want to help pay, because we pay for their missions. It's roughly around $400 a month that we pay for all their expenses while they're on their missions. And so other members of the church want to help sometimes, and so they can hit the little drop down and pick my son or my daughter, and then actually donate whatever they want to help towards that. So it's really nice to get that. Okay, next slide. Okay, fast offerings. I'm going to discuss this now. This is the other way of paying. Fasting and fast offerings are one way to help, right? Care for the poor and the needy. So the next slide, if you look at the next slide, this is a painting of the widow's mite, and this is the teaching of the Savior. I chose to show this now because the Savior's teaching here has a close connotation to how members of the church pay fast offerings. Members are not told exactly how much to give, but instead are given some general counsel and then asked to consider their own financial situation. Next slide. So this is directly from the handbook of our church about this. The Lord has established the law of the fast and fast offerings to bless his people and to provide a way for them to serve those in need, based off of Isaiah and Malachi. When members fast, they are asked to give to the church a fast offering at least equal to the value of the food they would have eaten. If possible, they should be generous and give more. Blessings associated with the law of the fast include closeness to the Lord, increased spiritual strength, temporal well-being, greater compassion, and a stronger desire to serve. So we typically will fast for 2 meals on Sunday, and it's about basically a 24-hour period. So you can sit there, sure, with a calculator and say, well, if I would have went to McDonald's, I would have paid this much. If I would have bought a sandwich at Sprouts, I would have paid. You could do that, but we're asked to give generously, a lot more if you can. But of course, what you're able to give. Very much like I heard earlier about do not impoverish yourself, but it should hurt a little bit because this is a way to give, right? Next slide. So fasting, again, the fast Sunday that we use every month, the Sabbath, one Sabbath of the month we use as our fast Sunday. It's the first Sunday of the month. And then we go to church and we have a fast and testimony meeting where we offer our testimonies of that. Okay, next slide. The way that you pay fast offerings, pretty much the same way. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. It's either in person or online, okay? And there's a slot for fast offerings. Again, separate from tithing, but it's something that we are asked to pay, okay? Next slide. So some of you guys may be wondering how the church gets members to pay fast tithing and fast offerings. Well, the members of the church view paying the tithing as a sacred blessing. It's a way to show our devotion to the Lord. It's an outward expression of an inner commitment to follow him. We view it as a commandment or a mitzvah, as we learned earlier today, right? And so it's a very solemn demonstration of our faith. In fact, we take the verse in Malachi seriously where he says, and again, stole my thunder, Tim, but we're going to read it anyway. Go ahead, next slide. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me, but ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offering. Many see it as the Lord's money that he has blessed us with, and is simply asking for $1 in 10 back to his kingdom. The funny thing is that we know he doesn't really need it. The Lord can make his kingdom grow however he sees fit. Paying tithing and offerings is a test of faith. The best part is that we know that we are blessed back even more than we give. I am grateful for the law of the tithing and fast offerings. It has blessed my life. It has allowed me to live in California and have 8 children and have a fruitful life and blessed with much prosperity. And I know that this is something that, many of us share. Giving, right, is a huge thing that we all share, and I'm just grateful to have been able to share this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. It just dawned on me, one more quick item of business we need to take care of before we go to Q&A. My wife sent me with a card for Linda Lowe. So if you're a member of Ventura County Interfaith Community, Linda Lowe was one of the founding members, and would love to have your signature on the card. So she, as many of you know, she has pancreatic cancer, and we just like to reach out to her with the card. So don't let me forget. My wife will shoot me if I forget. So don't let me forget to pass that card around towards the end of our time tonight. But questions and answers.
But if your wife shoots you, we'll send you a card.
Thank you. Or you send it to my wife, because I'll be dead.
Well, it depends how good a shot she
She's a good shot.
Oh, okay.
Questions and answers.
So I will ask a question of Adam. I know I've heard this before, but I don't remember the details. In a fast, so it would be the first Sunday of every month. Is that a 24-hour fast?
24 hours of no drinking or eating.
No drinking or eating?
Not even water.
Not even water.
Yeah, so in Judaism, there are actually, the major fast is on Yom Kippur, but it's very similar.
Right.
And then there are several other minor fast days which are daytime fasts. So like right before Passover, which is coming up, the firstborn, as you can remember, the firstborn had a harrowing time back in Egypt. So there's a traditional fast of the firstborn, but it's a daytime only fast, similar to Ramadan, and also in Purim there's a daytime fast. But there are some other 24-hour fasts in Judaism, but it's not regular once a month.
Yeah, well, the once a month is and then we have a sacrament meeting or a congregational meeting dedicated to only bearing your testimony instead of having pre-assigned speakers. But many of us will fast for personal reasons at any time, similar to that, and it doesn't need to be 24 hours, it can be any time you want. I fast all the time when I'm having a problem or when I need some guidance or help or when somebody's sick. Right now we have a young woman who has a very rare form of cancer, and she was given a couple of months to live. So our entire stake, our organization, all through Camarillo and Oxnard, we had a fast for her, right? And it was just something that we do, and this is a regular thing that we do, and again, it can be any amount of time.
The other thing that struck me as you spoke, and I think this is a difference between Judaism and other traditions, is I think kind of a revolutionary idea, which is sort of central to Jewish mysticism, which is God can't do it without us. So, you made a reference with, robbing God in the storehouse. So, in theory, you would like to believe that if God could eliminate world hunger tomorrow. Manna from heaven. it's been done. But the idea in Judaism and the idea of mitzvah and these, commanded givings is, I would say the central idea in Judaism is God could have created a perfect world, but chose to take creation only so far and turn over to God's messengers the work of completing creation. So God gives us blessings so that we will take care of other people. In theory, God could have skipped the middleman and taken care of the poor without the need for, all the work that your church does, that, other churches do, that synagogues do. But in practice, God, for, interesting reasons we can speculate on, chose to turn over to us the job of making the world more like the one that God has in mind.
As a missionary in Ecuador, I remember teaching the principle of tithing to, well, in Ecuador, it's strongly Catholic, right? And I grew up Catholic, and I'm used to the passing of the plate that you had mentioned, right? But we were never told in the Catholic Church really how much to give. It's just something that we just did. And I loved the idea of just having structure. And 10%, when I tell people now at work that I pay 10% of my income, they are floored that I would do that. And it's I don't budge. If anything, I pay a little bit more just to be sure, right? So they're shocked at that, but honestly, I don't feel, I see it as a privilege and an honor to do that.
And in Jewish tradition, even the beggar gives 10%
Really?
of what he or she begs to tzedakah, to charity. Because there's honor, as you so beautifully stated, in giving. So even someone who has barely enough gives 10% of the small amount that they have.
Well, let me ask you, so I'm sorry, what was the name of this again?
It's a tzedakah box.
Tzedakah box. So you're saying in every synagogue, there is one of these where this is where people put their money. So
So
is there how do you put the money in there? Like a bank?
Yeah, it's a bank.
Okay,
It's piggy
okay.
bank. Although in Judaism, we wouldn't use the word piggy
Never
bank. Probably not in Islam. So I would say there is one, but the major support for the synagogue is in dues or in some sort of more formalized giving system. And then I didn't get into this, but then the synagogue itself pays dues to an organization. So for example, I'm a Reform rabbi. So there is something called the Union for Reform Judaism, which is an organization whose members are congregations. Just as in a synagogue, the members are individuals. In the Union for Reform Judaism, there are probably about 600 or so member congregations, and the congregations pay dues to the umbrella organization, and about half of the money that they collect goes to our seminary, the Hebrew Union College, which is where I studied. So a major function of that organization is to support the training of rabbis and cantors and educators.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if you know, our church has a few universities and schools now in Utah and even Idaho. And so one of the perks of being a member of the church, our church, is that when you go to one of these universities, because where there's a supposition that your family has paid tithing, your tuition's a little bit less because of that. Yeah. So if you're not a member of our church, you would pay just a little bit more. Although it's really inexpensive, $3,000 a semester to go to BYU, which is a really great school, and it's so cheap now. Yeah, I know it's amazing how the church keeps the cost down because education, as we all know, how much that's gone up. But it's interesting that we have the same type of thing. Some of the money goes to our education. Yeah. And I question. So you said that you would never put money on there on Shabbat.
Right.
So what about all the other funds and stuff? That's just paid separately anyway. It's not paid. It's paid on a bill, like on the mail.
Yes.
Okay,
You get billed. You write a check.
Okay.
The theory is, the spiritual idea is that Shabbat is a taste of the world to come, the world redeemed, the arrival of the Messiah. So when the Messiah comes, we will have done all the work there is to do in the world. There's nothing to do Your to-do list go out the window. So you would say, well, why can't you spend money? And one reason is there's nothing to buy. You pretend, you're pretending every Shabbat that you have absolutely everything you need. There's nothing to shop for. There's nothing to desire. You pretend you have everything. You scrimp and save to have a beautiful meal on Friday night, and then on Saturday you don't work. It's a Sabbath, and you stay home. You study. You go to synagogue. You pray. You study. You're with your family, and the idea is stepping back from the work of creation, where we're actually God's partner in making the world a better place, to enjoying creation. I sometimes say the work of making the world a better place is full-time, 24/6, full-time.
24/6.
Yes.
So it's not a sense that money is somehow unholy.
No.
That's not the reason.
No. No. In fact, and I like the way you describe the tithes. The money that you give is holy.
Yeah, sacred.
And in fact, I didn't get into some of the details, but in biblical times there were different kinds of teruma and tithes, and some of it, even some of the animals that were sacrificed, some of the animals would turn completely into smoke on the altar. Some of them, the meat was given to the priests. Other kinds of sacrifice, the meat went to the priests and their families. Other kinds of sacrifice, the meat went to the priests and the Levites and their families. And then it was a very complex system. But the idea that you so beautifully stated, which I do like, is that money is holy. Money is the resources, that buy food and medicine, and so that there's nothing. I don't think in Judaism we have the sense that money is the root of all evil. I would say that that money that's used to do God's work is holy, and money that's used to just sort of inflate yourself, gratify personal needs.
It's the love of money, I think.
Yes,
Yeah,
the love of
in
money.
fairness.
The love of
Yes,
money.
that's actually, yes, that's an important distinction.
Nice, Bob.
So Michael, you said something that kind of surprised me in terms of you can buy a seat in the synagogue?
So actually, it was the origin of this thing. Apparently this came out of Protestant culture. And there's, I would say in Judaism, seats are sometimes assigned according to the givers, or sometimes they're even handed down. This is not my world. This is not the Reformed Jewish world. But you will go to synagogues, old synagogues, and there will be a plaque, the Cohen family. And you remember from Fiddler on the Roof, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. Well, the eastern wall is closest to the ark, and it's closest to the center of holiness. But this idea of paying for the privilege of being a member is now actually pretty common in the world of Judaism.
Yeah, I'm sensing you're not comfortable with this for probably the obvious reasons, because traditionally, I think, at least in my knowledge of other faiths, theoretically, when you give charity, you should do it completely without anybody knowing about it.
So
If you can imagine, and so it's like, I'm buying the privilege to get the front row seat. That creates a whole dynamic which I can see causing all sorts of problems.
So I think 12th century Jewish philosopher named Maimonides
Yep.
has a hierarchy of tzedakah.
Yeah.
And the lowest form is giving publicly and grudgingly.
Right.
And it goes up slightly. There are 8 levels.
Right.
And at the highest level, you are giving to someone, they don't know, you don't know who you're giving to,
Right.
and they don't know from
Where
whom
it's
it's coming.
Right.
At a lower level, and I can't remember which one is higher and lower, is you are giving to someone, you know who's getting it, but they don't know who's giving it.
Right.
At a lower level than that, the person who's getting it knows who's giving it, and the person, so you're helping, let's say, an individual, and you're giving that person the money. And that works out in practice, you know, in my synagogue, I would have a rabbi's discretionary fund, which people who would donate money to.
Right.
So if a family would come to me in need, I would help support them. So they don't know the source of that money, which member was giving that money, and the person giving the money doesn't know which family is getting it. But anonymity is not,
It's not enforced.
it's not only not enforced, I mean, as I said, you'll have plaques on, you know, this,
Well, that's
the
another-
Torah scroll was given by this family and so on, and it works. You know, people like to have their name associated
Yeah.
with, you know, you see it in charitable organizations everywhere. There's a scroll of honor.
No, I know, it's done all over the place, but you can see where the problem is.
So the issue with Judaism is getting stuff done.
Yeah.
I would say a huge thing, and I talk about this a lot, in Judaism, it's not so much what you believe, but what you do.
Right.
So I would say, if I'm sick, pray for me, knock your socks off, fast for me, you know, but
Bring the chicken soup.
help me get to a doctor,
Yeah.
you know, support medical research. That to me is kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Another thing you said in the question and answer period was how even the beggar will give some of his resources that he apparently begged
Yes.
today back to the church, which is, again, at least in our tradition, it's like the concept is first get yourself stabilized
Mhm.
before you worry about charity, because you're a bigger burden on society if you're not stable. So, not that we necessarily want to encourage begging, but the point is that, I mean, I know people who can't seem to pay their own bills, but then when they do get some money, they give it all away.
Mhm.
And it seems like the proper thing would be help people get stable, and if that means, you know, not taking money from the beggar who does already have, I mean, then you turn around and have to support him anyway, so, I mean, maybe you have some comment on that.
Maimonides' highest level of tzedakah is providing someone with a job so they can support themselves,
Right.
rather than just, you know, buy a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish,
Right.
teach a person to fish, and so on. So the highest form of tzedakah is enabling someone to be self-supporting.
Right.
Y'all are so quiet.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about giving meat, and some meat goes up in smoke, some goes to the priests, some goes to the priests and their families, that's basically how they got paid. So let's talk modern days. Salary schedules. Do rabbis get paid? Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do the religious officials get paid?
Yeah, so rabbis, well, I get paid, although I'm semi-retired now, but even my job as a community rabbi is a paid rabbi, it's a paid position, very part-time. And I would say many rabbis these days are employees of their synagogue, and they get paid. You know, if you go back in ancient times, rabbis also had another career. For example, Maimonides, of whom I spoke, was a physician, and probably earned his living being a physician rather than being a scholar. I think LDS it's different, right?
Yeah, it's different. So none of us get paid. Like when I was a bishop, which again I was a bishop, and typically it's a calling, right? And you do not aspire, you do not, you don't run for office. You know, it's something that you don't even really. I wouldn't say you don't want. You want to be worthy and live a life that would be worthy enough, but you don't aspire. You don't ask for it. And I was a bishop for 5 years, and basically it's like being a pastor. You're in charge of the congregation. I think I had 600 members. And so, yeah, none of us are paid. None of the members that volunteer are paid. And now I'm in the stake presidency, and so now we are over eight actual wards, so 8 bishops, and we don't get paid for that as well. I mentioned that I have a job, and I work here in Ventura for a community memorial hospital. I work in the ambulatory medicine clinics, and I have a technology job, so I have a full-time job. My children are going to school and doing their own things. Now, where there's a little bit of a difference here is, some of the leaders of our church are asked to be 100% full-time in the church. Some like the picture I showed you of our prophet, our president, and his counselors, and the 12. And there's another group of men called the 70. There's women that are the Relief Society presidency. All of these folks, they are given a stipend to live off of, because some of them are asked to do this at a young age, in their 40s, to give up their, and for example, our prophet, our President Nelson, he was a world-renowned heart surgeon. He was one of the first ones to deal with heart transplants. He left that job in his 40s, and he talks about in his biography about how his colleagues were saying, "Are you crazy? You have a chance to become very famous and make lots and lots of money, and you're going to give it up to go serve in your church?" And he said, "Yeah," and that's what we're at. But it's of course voluntary. So those men and women that are asked to do this, they're given a stipend, but it's very modest. It's enough to live off of. You're not going to get rich off of it, and their work is 100% dedicated to the church. So I hope that answered the question.
So do either of your churches have services that the congregation pay for, like maybe a marriage ceremony or a counseling or something like this?
If you're a member of a synagogue, typically all of those things, which I would call life cycle services, you don't pay extra for. So they're part of your, they're provided to you as consequence of being a member. I do conduct a lot of those things for people who are not members of any synagogue. And so, that's sort of, I call it my rabbi business. And so I will probably do about 12 or 15 weddings a year, and maybe 20 to 25 funerals a year, and then some baby namings and things like that. And then there's an honorarium, but I always make it clear that if people can't afford to pay, I am happy to do it without being reimbursed. That the Los Angeles, the Southern California Board of Rabbis sets a kind of a standard fee, but I always stress that if that's a barrier, I'm still there.
We do not charge anything for, anything at all like that. In fact, when I was a bishop, I married quite a few people that were not members of our church, and we even allow them to use our buildings to do their receptions and things like that, and we never would ever charge for anything like that. Funerals, the same things that he mentioned, we just, that's not something that we pay for. And one of the things that I didn't really get into when I was bishop, we have a welfare program, and so a lot of times that's within our congregation. If somebody is in need of help, that fast offering money that I mentioned to you, that once a month, right? The bishop of the ward uses that money to help his local members with maybe if they have a problem paying their rent, if they need money for gas, if they need food. So I would actually, members that were in need would come to me, and usually we would try to get them back on their feet. It was not not to pay for their lifestyle. It was something to do to help them get through their tough time and quickly become self-sufficient. And so that's what we would do with that fast testimony money. If we didn't use all that money, we would then pass it along to the stake in Camarillo, and if Camarillo didn't use it, it would go to the church. So we basically use this opportunity to not, we don't ever really collect funds in our positions. That's really not something that's accepted at all.
So one of the things to be a rabbi, certainly in Reformed tradition, I went through a 5-year full-time graduate program. So are there sort of formal education processes in LDS, as that, let's say you had to do to be, I don't know, a stake president or a bishop or something?
No, there is not. There's no certifications, there's no degrees. It's the hard knocks, right? It's going in there and serving and learning as you go, and it's tough sometimes because there are some men that are called to be bishops in their 20s, and they don't have a lot of life experience. And so fortunately, you have a stake president who can offer you counsel, and you have men and women in your congregation who are called to lead with you, and you have a ward council. There's a woman president of the women, there's a women president of the primary, there's a women president of the young women, there's a Sunday school president, there's all these people, and so you work together to help solve problems. But certain things, right, if a member's coming to you with a confidential situation, I had many marriages that were failing, and the couples would come to me. I'm not a licensed counselor, right? So I had to use my own personal experience to help them. And then, of course, I would recommend that they go seek professional help, people that have the licenses and things like that. And sometimes I would help them pay for it if they couldn't pay for it themselves. That was part of our fast offering when they would go to that. But yeah, there is no, even when I was a seminary teacher, there is no seminary, for me, there wasn't, because I'm a volunteer now. In Utah, where we have loads and loads of members, a lot of the kids, they go to school and there are paid seminary teachers. It's actually a job because it's like they actually leave their high school, go across the street, go into a church building and get taught. And it's a period in their day because there's so many of them. Mm-hmm. Here in California and most other states, it's before school, early morning, which is what I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So they're doing it, and so we're all volunteers, but when you are doing it in Utah, you're doing it all day long, 5 or 6 classes a day. It's a job. And so that's different. That's where you do get paid.
About how much time a day would you say you spend on your LDS work compared to your professional work?
On Sunday, it's pretty much all day. I start my day at 7:30. I'm usually home by 4. Yeah. Other days of the week, it fluctuates. But when I was bishop, it was probably the hardest because you're in the trenches, right? You're with the members. You're
a lot of administration. Right?
A lot of administration, which I would typically leave a lot of that to my counselors and the ward council, where I would focus on the youth. Our primary responsibility of bishops is to help the youth, because we all know what's going on in this world today. We know how difficult it is, especially for our youth. So the bishop's responsibility was to spend time with the youth and build them up. And so that was where I did most of my focus. Of course, I had to help members that were in need, welfare-wise. So I come home from work, I'd come home, have dinner, events would start at 7, I wouldn't come home till 9:30. There are some times where I'll have meetings on a Thursday and I'll be out for 2-3 hours. It just really fluctuates, but in a given week, yeah, you're looking at anywhere between 15 to 20 hours, depending on your calling. Some callings don't ask for that much. And we understand that there are couples that are younger and they have young children, right? When I was growing up, at one point, my family, I had 5 kids, 6 and under, right? I wasn't asked to be a bishop at that stage. I wasn't asked to be a state member of the state presidency. I was a Sunday school teacher where it was only on Sundays. So I could prepare it in a week and I could take care of my family. We consider that, the Lord considers that in when we call people to all these callings. But you'd be surprised, sometimes the Lord will push us and stretch us, and we will get called to what we would consider a heavy calling, even when we have a lot of responsibility. It's funny, the people like that are called to these bishops and state presidents and Relief Society presidents, a lot of them are CEOs and very successful in their job because they've proven that they are organized and they're disciplined and they have the finances to be able to even use their time off at work to go to scout camps and youth camps and conferences and even just give more of their time because they have more flexibility. A lot of the men that are called to be presidents of our missions, when I was a missionary, there was about 300 missionaries in Ecuador, and there was a man from Bakersfield actually that was called, him and his wife, they're called on a 3-year mission to go be mission presidents, right? Usually they're retired folks, or if they're not retired, they're very successful younger people who can leave a job and come back. I mean, we have a person right now that just got called in our stake. Him and his wife, going to be called to Costa Rica. He's in the middle of being a lawyer, and he's going to leave his business and go be a mission president for 3 years. And that's just something that he's able to do because he's a partner. He's the main guy in it. So he can do that and come back even and probably still work if he wanted to.
So I'm very interested in when you say receive a calling.
Yeah.
I think, and I'll defer to my Christian friends, calling is often understood as kind of a personal interaction with God. It's not language, by the way, we use in Judaism. Right. I'm almost never asked, when will you call? So I'm curious, when you speak of a calling, is it God calling you, or is it the administrative structure of LDS saying, you know what, we need X, Y, and Z. It looks to us like you can do this.
I think it's a little bit of both. And one of the things that I've been taught as a leader in extending callings. And when we say callings, because there's no, like I said, nobody goes to school. We're not paid. So we have our regular members of the ward who are asked to do whatever situation needs to be filled, whether that be a Sunday school teacher of the youth, of the adults, whether that be in charge of the primary, in a nursery, over Sunday school. we as leaders, right, we would pray about who we should call to these positions, and then we call them callings. So yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you think, well, I mean, that person over there is an accountant by nature, so we should call him as the clerk, as the ward clerk, because he knows finances, right? That does come into play. We do use our logic, we do use our brains, but sometimes you'd be surprised that the Lord may say, this person, here's a perfect example. I was a bishop, and I had one of my counselors, because you always have two counselors. He was moving away, right? And I have my congregation, so I'm thinking, okay, I know he's leaving in a month. Okay, who am I going to call to replace him? And I'm thinking about it, I'm praying about it, I'm fasting and praying, and I'm just not coming up with a name. And there's many worthy men and able to do it, but for some reason, nobody would come to me. And then all of a sudden, I live in Oxnard, where my congregation borders both of the bases, the Magoo base and the Wainimi base, right? So we have a lot of members that come that are stationed there for 3 years, and then they leave, right? So we have a lot of that. Well, one day I'm walking out of my office at church, and I see the back of this guy in a shirt, right? And he's got a military haircut, so I already know he's military. But I quickly look at him, and all of a sudden a thought came to me saying, "There's your counselor." I had no idea who this guy was, right? He was just there because they had just moved in, and his wife was there with his kids, and they were giving the clerk their information, their address, to move them into our congregation, into our ward. And he turned around, and I looked at him, and his name was Joel Nelson. And I just said I heard my thought said, "There's your counselor." And sure enough, I called him, and he was one of my finest counselors I had. Yeah, he was one of the best.
I personally am very impressed with the amount of time and effort and diligence you put in without the benefit of coffee. and or a stiff drink from you.
Well, I was not always a member of the church, so I did indulge in those things before I joined, and I love coffee. And I did love a drink, but yeah, it's been since I was 20 years old. I'm 52 now, so it's been that long that I've not had any of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Michael, how would you describe, after you did your 55-year career as a physicist, your calling to become an ordained rabbi? What would you use the term?
I was thinking, I don't think, when we get called, it's not a collect call, we actually get paid. So what I would say is, my own process, and many of you know this, I mean, my late wife died of a genetic disease, which affects my 3 children. I have 1 child in a nursing home. I have 2 that are in early stages of this disease. And it makes you struggle with the questions of why and what do I do now? And so as I was going through this, I would say initially, the comfort of community, just going to synagogue. I used to say I went not kicking and screaming to services when my wife would drag me there, but at least moaning and groaning. But I found comfort, I would say, in community. And then, we had a new rabbi, and I took my first adult introduction to Judaism class, and the more I learned, the more I loved it. So I would say I just fell in love with Judaism and studying Judaism, and it seemed to me to be a natural path to take of a career of doing what I love to do. But I didn't, it's very funny, and I'm mildly embarrassed about this, but we don't have this sense that God, spoke to me on high and, thus saith the Lord. There's actually a very funny story. You've probably heard this. I'll just say Moshe. Moshe is in an area where there's going to be a flood. And the area has been evacuated, and the police come in a sheriff's car and says, Moshe, this area is going to be flooded, you need to leave. And Moshe says, no, I trust God. I've been a good Jew all my life, I'll be fine. And the water starts rising, and then they come in, like with an ATV, and no, I'm fine. And then it's up to the 2nd floor, and they're coming in a boat, and Moshe's on the 2nd floor, and leave now. No, I trust God, and so on. Well, the water keeps rising. He is now on the roof, and the helicopter comes. It's your last chance. No, I trust God. Of course, he drowns, and he comes before God, and Moshe says to God, I don't understand. I've been faithful, I've been loyal, I've done all these things, and why didn't you save me? And God says, Moshe, who do you think sent the Jeep, the boat, and the helicopter? So I actually had a very profound insight of going from in tears and in deep prayer, going from a place where it was clear to me that becoming a rabbi was impossible given my financial situation and family situation, in one insight to where it became easy. And it was just a reorienting of what I considered to be important and what I needed to do with my life. So I would say that was as close to the feeling of a calling that I've ever had.
But it sounds like there's some taboo or the word calling doesn't go in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I would say in my world, you have the ultra-Orthodox, the Chabad rabbis, who are very much, Hashem, which is a word which literally means the name, asks me to do this and calls me to do this. And there was one of the things, in my thesis about toward a theology of Jewish-Christian partnership, one of the things I think Jews can learn from Christians is this idea of a personal relationship with God, and a deeply personal relationship, which I would say in the more modern worlds of Judaism, we tend not to think about so much. And I think to our loss. And I often say, this may confuse everyone, including me, that there are times I'm not certain I believe in God, but I am certain I have a relationship with God. And that relationship is one of love, it's one of anger. There are times, when I'm horribly angry with God for, reasons in my family, and, when I hear about, the folks you're fasting over. I got a call just as I was pulling in the parking lot of a friend of mine, said another, Jewish young man in his 40s has some form of cancer and is not given very long to live. I mean, I'm angry with God about that. The word Israel means one who wrestles with God. So, and those of us who are in relationships, I would say many of us here, know that relationship isn't all sweetness and light. It's anger, and it's back and forth, and it's give and take, and that's the way I see my relationship with God.
Yeah, we would say you found your dharma. You found your dharma by becoming
Yes, sir.
a rabbi.
I'm attending for the first time. I attended in Ventura County Temple.
Madhu?
Yes, Madhu.
Yes.
Yeah. Ventura County Temple, when this gentleman did like a speech on Gita. I mean, sitting here for 1.5 hours, I can see things that you talked about, helping people, connecting with people, relationship with God and all the kind of things. But I have a question. For example, if you are a Jew, do you have to go to a synagogue, or you can go to any synagogue? Or for example, you are a Christian, you go to LDS, or you can go to Baptist, you can go to anything else. Why I am saying is that, for example, in Ventura County area, there are 4 temples, Hindu temples. And they are not started by any organization. Somebody said that we want a temple, bought a place, rented a place, started a temple, brought a priest. In Hinduism, that priest in the temple simply does certain rituals, prayers and events and things like that. But he is not a counselor, because that is left to somebody else. It is not the job of the priest. Now the thing is, one day I go to this temple, tomorrow I go to another temple, day after tomorrow I go to another temple. I'm not a member of any of these temples. If for one temple I give money monthly because they need help. In another, I go for some events, and I may give some offering. Like you mentioned about passing the plate. We do arti and then pass the plate, and we drop the contribution there. So all different things I can see in Hindu Dharma. But my question is, your congregation is, I heard you saying you get married people who don't belong to the congregation also. But otherwise, in general,
Are they LDS?
there is a membership as a concept, correct? Okay.
Yeah, so I would say, very importantly, Judaism is both a religion and a people. So I often say it's the last surviving example of a time when your nationality and your religion were one and the same. In ancient times, if you were Egyptian, you worshiped the Egyptian gods, Greek gods. If you were an Israelite, you worshiped the Israelite God. So I would be recognized as a Jew in any synagogue in the world. Now there may be, misinformed people. You can't. What are you going to do? But if you're a Jew, you are welcome and accepted in any synagogue in the world. And there's actually a tradition of requiring a community to pray. So in Judaism, many of the prayers can only be said in the presence of 10. We're talking about 10. Yeah, it's called a minyan. You need 10 people in order to say many of the prayers. And any Jew is welcome to do that. There are controversies about who is a Jew, and we can get into that. But there is no Jewish community that would look upon me as not being a Jewish because I'm a member of this synagogue. I affiliate with the synagogue to have a place to worship and to have a place, to teach children. People will often approach a membership in a synagogue like a health club. Okay, I'm paying these dues. What am I getting for it? I hardly ever come. Why should I pay? Or my kids are already educated. They don't need to go to school. And of course, the answer is you were educated as a Jew because someone before you paid to have a community that educated you. If you want there to be, a Jewish community in Camarillo for the Jews, somebody's got to support it and pay the bills.
Yeah, for us, it's, so I see two parts of your question. So the first thing I'll mention is that we have temples and we have meeting houses, right? And there's over 100 temples throughout the world, right? And there's many more being planned and being built. Meeting houses are everywhere as well. In fact, there's a couple here in Ventura, there's a couple in Oxnard, there's a couple in Camarillo, and there's, when I lived in Utah, I lived in Utah for a little while. My daughter right now lives in Arizona, my son lives in Texas. It doesn't matter which organization, which church you go to, in that sense, you'll be welcome. And in fact, it's funny, a lot of the buildings are cookie cutters. It looks exactly the same, right? But our church is a church of order. So we basically don't want, say, one group of people wanting to, or a huge group of people going to one building and overwhelm that building, right? And that bishop. So we say, if you live in these boundaries, this is the building you need to go to. And you can't even get a calling typically if you decide, well, I don't like that building, I'm gonna go to this building. We've had that. And so in those cases, well, those people really can't serve because the bishop has what we call as keys, meaning they have the keys to leadership, and you have to live in that boundary to be directed and led by him. And if you decide to go to that ward that is not your boundaries, he technically can't receive that for you, right? So, but the other part of your question, so the first thing is, yes, you can go to any congregation, any temple, it's all the same, right? The other part of your question that I heard you say was about going to other denominations and other. Now, I would be happy to visit any other denomination. My parents are still, I'm the only member of my family. My parents are still Catholics, and I go to their church once in a while with them just because I want to be with them. They have a yearly fundraiser, and I go and I cook because I love to grill meat. I go and I do on Friday and Saturday. I donate my time and make food, and they sell it for their to help them. So I'll do stuff like that. But as far as like saying I can worship there the same way I would worship in my congregation, that would not be the case. It would be very different for us to do that. But as far as visiting and having people come visit us all day long, we love it. But if I want to worship the way I believe, it needs to be in a temple or a meeting house that our church has.
Would you conduct a wedding for two
Yeah, I did that, and in those cases, there's some stipulations, right? We really can't do it in our church building, but I did some on beaches, I did some in homes, and they really don't want us to do that, but at the same time, we want to, like you said, we want to help people that we can. So yeah, I did do that a couple of times. Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's 8:30, so in respect for everybody's time, I'm just going to say thank you. This evening, and somewhere there is a survey. Help me find it, guys.
And there's a card to sign.
Where's the card?
Yes, there's a card to sign. Thank you.
So
Surveys
you're
are,
not getting shot.
surveys are here, and the card I'm hoping is still, yes, it's still here. So if you could just give Linda a little remembrance. And Rabbi, it's especially important that you sign that card.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, folks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, and
Let's
we
Get
are.
between you guys.
What's that?